I was just blown away by Suzanne's story. I just blown away by that story, and it just lit up like a light bulb on the screen to me. The fact that she had been a Navy commander and in that whole world, and now she's so in the spirit world, and that's the transition we want to see for the rest of the world. And I was just thrilled, and I was so excited when she said yes. So please give a warm welcome to Suzan Giesemann.
Hey everybody, a nice crowd. Yes. Okay, great. All this talk about going to the light reminds me of a story I heard just recently about this man that went to the light, but he actually didn't come back. He crossed that threshold and was at the pearly gates. And St. Peter greeted him there, and he said, "We're happy to have you, but there's an entrance exam. You have to be able to spell a word." And the man said, "What is the word?" St. Peter said, "The word is love." The man said, "Oh, I can spell that. L-O-V-E." And St. Peter said, "Great, you may come in." So he stepped in through the gates, and St. Peter said, "Well, excuse me, I have to run off. I have a meeting, but would you watch the gates for a few minutes for me?" And the guy says, "Sure." So he turns around. Lo and behold, here comes his wife. And he says, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "You're never going to believe this. On the way home from your funeral, this car comes through the intersection broadsides me, and here I am." And he said, "Well, you're never going to believe this. There's an entrance exam for heaven, and you have to spell a word." And she says, "What's the word?" And he says, "Czechoslovakia." Okay. And yes, we're here to talk about death and life after death, and it's good to be able to laugh and make jokes about that when you do realize that death is merely a transition to another dimension of reality, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. And joy and laughter raises your vibration, and it's all about raising our vibrations while we're here, because it's certainly going to be raised when we are in that next dimension. I do have to say that I was a little shocked when it said on the flyer that I'm an NDE-er. I don't consider myself one at all. While I have had that experience of going through that tunnel and towards the light, that was in a meditation, in a meditative state. And boy, what Diane says is true. The feeling of bliss left me sobbing. And I remember saying, why would anyone go back except to serve? Except to serve. So, a good message for all of us. We're here to serve, to learn to love. That's what it's all about. You heard a little bit about my background. I served 20 years in the United States Navy, retired in 2003 as a commander. I had the great honor of being a special assistant to the head of the Navy, the Chief of Naval Operations. I had the great honor of being commanding officer of my own organization. And then my greatest honor of all was being asked by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Henry Shelton, whose book just came out last month, to be his aide-de-camp, his right-hand man, woman, whatever. He is the head of the entire United States Armed Forces. So in that position, what an honor to be at his side as we would go on Capitol Hill to top secret meetings. I've run around the halls of the Pentagon. I've been in the White House strategy room. I've flown on Air Force One. I've met with kings and queens. And why am I here today? Because now I sit in a darkened room and talk to dead people. And so it's the transition, how that happened, that I want to share with you, because there are a lot of messages in that, and it's my mission now. You don't stay in the Navy for 20 years without having a sense of mission, a sense of duty about everything you do, and I'm all about sharing the message that this life is not all there is with as wide an audience as possible. So that's my goal today. I want to take you back to September 11th, 2001. I was with the chairman. I was his aide on that day. We were in the air on our way to Europe. Later that week, General Shelton was going to be knighted by Queen Elizabeth. I was so excited because I would get to be there and see that, witness that. How cool would that be? And then we got the word that everybody got, that some planes had hit the World Trade Center. And so I remember putting on a headset on that plane and talking to the colonel back at the Pentagon to get more news about what was going on. And all of a sudden there was all this commotion through the headset, and he said, "Suzanne, something just happened here at the Pentagon. I think it was a bomb went off. We have to get back to you." And of course we know it wasn't a bomb. It was a plane hitting the Pentagon. And so General Shelton looked at me and he said, "Have the pilot take us back." So I went into the cockpit and told the pilot to turn us around, and he said, "Commander, our flight path is going to take us directly over Manhattan." And it did. We were the very last plane in the air that day. We were several hours out over the Atlantic when we turned the plane around. So by this time, every other plane had been grounded. And we did fly right over Manhattan, and we have a photograph of the huge plume of smoke coming up from there. So I saw that with my own eyes. And then we landed in Washington, D.C., where the streets were deserted. We landed at Andrews Air Force Base and had this big police escort all the way back through these deserted streets. It was surreal. And looking at our burning office building, the big plume of smoke coming out of there. So those of us on the plane were the only ones in the world to see both sites with our own eyes on the day of the attack. And it had a tremendous effect for me to be walking around the outside of the Pentagon and have to step over a piece of jet engine in the grass. And then look at that gaping hole where I knew that people had been sitting. And this was my first real up close and personal experience with death. And to have to work in that building for the next 3 days while it burned. I mean, we worked there for months, but the building actually was on fire for 3 days. They couldn't put it out, but we had to keep coming to work. And to watch them look for bodies and to feel that death around, I realized then how sensitive I was to energy, because it was almost more than I could bear. Then I made the mistake of volunteering to be an escort for some of the victims' families at a memorial service that the president came to. And when I say mistake, it's because I had led a very happy life to that point. I had never had any tragedy in my life. The only deaths I'd known were those of my grandparents, and you come to expect that. But here all of a sudden I am surrounded, I'm on a bus with grieving families, with that raw grief, and I'm at this ceremony, and I thought, I need to get away from here, I can't handle this. Well, my husband and I are big sailors. We had a sailboat, and the week after the attacks, I said to him, I hope this isn't wrong, but I need to get away. Let's go out on the boat this weekend and just get away from all this. So I remember sitting on the boat, staring up at the sky, and I said, you know, honey, life's too short to not live your dreams while you can. I learned that lesson on September 11th. And we had had this dream until then of selling our house and cars and sailing off into the sunset on our sailboat. I couldn't retire for 2 more years. You have to have a minimum of 20 years in. But I decided then and there, that week, because of 9/11, to retire at 20 years and live that dream. And that's exactly the way that played out. I served exactly 20 years, retired, and the next day we sailed off on our sailboat. And we didn't stop sailing for about 3.5 years. It was an idyllic lifestyle. Just imagine going wherever you feel like going, wherever the wind blows. We went north and south a few times and said, this is getting kind of old, let's go east. And we sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and into the Mediterranean, and it was just awesome to be in these Mediterranean countries, having sailed there on our own boat. So life is wonderful, right? But I'm sure a lot of you have learned, the universe has a way of teaching us the lessons we came here to learn, even if we don't want to learn them. So you can run away all you want, but if you haven't learned your lessons, it's going to catch up with you. And I had to ask those big questions that we all ask ourselves until that time. What is life about? What is my purpose? Why am I here? But 9/11 dug those up again, but then you just kind of put them aside and go back to enjoying life. So there my husband and I were anchored off of Croatia, a little deserted island, and we have a single sideband radio that allowed us to get emails. So we got an email while we were there, nobody around for miles, and it was from my stepdaughter Elizabeth that it said, Dad, phone home, it's important. We had heard from her recently. She was trying to get her finances together, and we thought she finally figured out what to do. So we called her the next day. Didn't hear from our two daughters very much. So the next day, the nearest phone was 60 miles away. We get underway, and we make our way by sailboat, which is very slow, to this little Croatian island with a phone. And my husband gets on the phone, called Elizabeth, and he said, "What's up?" And actually, Elizabeth hadn't answered the phone. It was his other daughter, Susan's husband, who answered. Warren was a Marine, and Warren answered, and Ty said, what's up? And he said, "Nothing good." And the next thing out of my husband's mouth was this wailing that I'd never heard from him. I thought that our daughter Susan, who was 6 months pregnant, had lost the baby, but it was far worse than that. Our daughter Susan had been struck by lightning and killed, along with her 6-month fetus. And so there we are, half a world away, in the middle of nowhere. And it was hard enough for me, who had known Susan for about 14 years at that point. She was 27 years old, a sergeant in the Marine Corps, definitely Daddy's little girl. And for me, it was hard enough to lose her, but to see my soulmate crumpled in a heap on the deck of our boat when we got back there, just sobbing, that's a life-changing moment. So we made our way back to the United States, back for Susan's funeral at the Marine Corps base. And this was the turning point for me, because we each individually went in to look at Susan's body in the coffin. And anybody who has ever seen a lifeless body will know what I'm talking about here. I looked at her and dressed in her Marine Corps dress uniform, and this one thought went through my head repeatedly. I think I even said it out loud. That's not Susan. That's not Susan. Because she was so vibrant and so alive. And a lifeless body is not just different, it's lifeless, because it's missing that which animates it, the spirit. That's this body. I knew that I was just looking at the vessel, that it housed the spirit, and in that instant I knew the spirit had to survive. Whatever happens to the body, the spirit had to survive. And that's when I made it my mission then and there to prove, if only to myself and my husband, that life is eternal and that Susan was still around. Now, how are you going to do that? Okay, so I've been in the Navy now for 20 years, and I'm married to this destroyer captain who's even more by the book than I am. But I'd had this closet fascination with mediums over the years. And I say closet because I'd read these books and I'd go into New Age bookstores and feel like I was sneaking around. Certainly nothing I'd ever talked about with my military colleagues. Really fascination with this. And but I knew about mediums, and I knew this is how I was going to do it. I had to find myself a medium, and a good one. And how do you do that? Well, it also had to be somebody that didn't know my last name, didn't know anything about me, because we had put a tribute right away to Susan on our website that said she was a Marine, this is how she died. And so if there was any chance that a medium would know my last name, I would always feel that maybe she Googled my name. So it had to be somebody who didn't know my last name. Well, we had to go back to the boat in Croatia. So how am I going to find a medium from over there? Well, stop at a bookstore. I had learned by this point from my metaphysical readings that all guidance is available to all of us all the time if you just ask, if you just attune to that greater intelligence that's around us all the time. So I remember standing there in that bookstore and saying, which of these books am I supposed to take with me? I get one shot, because I'm going back to a country where they don't even speak English. And I remember feeling so guided, saying, this one, and this one. And I took 3 of them while my husband's standing there saying, we gotta catch a flight, come on, let's go. So there were 3 books about the afterlife. Now I had a real reason to be reading about the afterlife and mediums. I started reading the first book on the plane on the way back to Europe. It was a book by a great medium named George Anderson. Yeah, it was either Lessons from the Light or Walking in the Garden of Souls. But I got halfway through it, and we stopped in Venice on the way back to get our feet back on the ground. It was not a pleasure trip. It was a let's compose ourselves trip. And I remember sitting on the balcony of our hotel room reading this book, number 1, that I had pulled off the shelf. And suddenly I heard voices. I looked at my husband. I said, do you hear somebody talking? And he said, yeah, but there's nobody around. I went into the hotel room, and the television had turned itself on. So I walked back and said, that's funny. Did you ever hear that happening? My husband had never heard of that. I go back to reading, and the very next paragraph read, the spirit world will often let you know they're around by manipulating electrical appliances. That was book number 1. So we get back to Croatia, we get on our boat, and we decide, let's leave Croatia behind. It has really bad memories associated with it now, so we're going to head south and go to Greece. So we're sailing off the coast of Croatia. We're about 4 miles from land. It's just a blue sliver in the distance there. And I'm reading book number 2, another one by George Anderson. And I'm reading, and my husband is at the helm, and he says, Suzanne, have you noticed that yellow butterfly that's been following in our wake for the last 2 days? And I looked back and I could see it. And I said, you know, I did notice that, but now that you mention it, it's pretty strange to see a butterfly this far offshore, let alone one that's following behind us for 2 days. And just as I said that, the butterfly came up, flew between the 2 of us, and flew away. And I go back to reading book number 2, and the very next paragraph says, the spirit world can leave you signs as subtle as a yellow butterfly in December. And I have to tell you, if there's anything I value, it is my integrity, my honesty. I do not exaggerate any stories. Nothing I tell you today is anything but the truth and exactly how it happened. So we go that night to a little island, and we pull up along the seawall, and we're tying our boat up. There are 6 other boats there. Ours is the only boat with a swarm of yellow butterflies that hovered over it for half an hour. I'm still kind of not connecting this with the spirit world. I'm too new at this whole spirit world concept. The next day, before getting underway, we just decided to stretch our legs and take a hike up this big hill that was there. We were both still numb with grief. We were in shock. So we weren't talking much. My husband's ahead of me on the trail, and I'm walking along in my naive concept of how we work with the spirit world, thinking if I beg Susan hard enough, she will materialize before me. And I can remember saying, Susan, just let me see you. Let me know you're around. Give me a sign that you're around. And I know her well enough that I could almost hear her now saying then, haven't you noticed the yellow butterflies? Because we got to the top of this big hill and turned around. My husband's still ahead of me. He's a good 50 yards down the trail from me. And out of the corner of my left eye, I see something, and I look up, and it's a yellow butterfly, and it flew straight at me, flew completely around me in a circle, bounced into my heart, then took off in a beeline straight down the trail towards my husband. I was so shocked, I yelled, "Ty!" And he turned around just as the butterfly got to him, flew a complete circle around him, and bounced into his back at the level of the heart, which would have been his heart if I hadn't made him turn around. And that's when I knew there's something more at work here than what I can perceive with my physical senses. This is just too coincidental. I've come now to believe there are no coincidences. So those were my butterfly incidents, both already 2 coincidences with the 2 books I found. Well, the 3rd book was called The Afterlife Experiments. Some of you may be familiar with that, by Dr. Gary Schwartz. He gathered some of the top mediums in the country and then conducted some very scientific experiments to try to prove or disprove the existence of an afterlife. These experiments were very convincing. As I read that book, I got more excited, and I said, if I'm going to convince my husband that Susan is still around. I want one of the mediums of this book. So I go to an internet cafe in Europe and I Google the 5 names that are in there. 4 of them have big fancy websites. Waiting lists probably a year too long. I'm sure they charged $1,000 or more, and I'm not sure, at the time I didn't really want to spend that kind of money because I was pretty sure this was the real thing, these mediums, but not that much to spend that kind of money. But the 5th medium was this woman named Ann Gaiman. Never heard of her before, but she was the real deal. I looked a little further and found out that Ann was the pastor of a spiritualist church in Northern Virginia. And I looked at that and I'd never heard of spiritualism with a capital S. What is that? So I Googled spiritualism with a capital S, and they'd have these 9 principles that they follow. We believe in infinite intelligence. We believe that life is eternal and that it's possible to communicate with those who have crossed to the other side. I read the whole list of 9 and I said, well, gosh, if that's what a spiritualist believes, then I'm a spiritualist, because I believe every one of these. So I looked into Ann Gaiman some more. Coincidence number 3. By this time, we had decided to leave our boat in Europe, go back to the United States, and get our feet on the ground for a while, go back to work, move back into some property we owned. Well, Ann Gaiman's house was 5 miles from that house that we decided to move back into. Her church, 20 minutes away in Falls Church, Virginia. So first thing I do when I get back to Virginia, get on the phone to try to get a reading with Ann Gaiman. She had had hip replacement surgery and was not giving readings, but she was teaching a class in the philosophy of spiritualism. Well, I just wanted to be in her presence. I wanted to hear her stories. Sitting in that classroom, I was blown away. This woman had some amazing stories. And I remember one time she said, some astrologer read my horoscope and said somebody's going to write my biography in the next year. And I remember thinking, wow, what lucky writer is going to get to do that? Anna's in her 70s, a whole lifetime of being a medium. In fact, she told me the other day that she demonstrated at the Church of the Spirit over 40 years ago, with messages from the spirit world. But sitting in the classroom hearing all those stories, I thought, no, that's a writer's dream. So a couple of people beside me raised their hand and said, I'll write your story, I'll write your story. And I thought, well, who am I to think? I had published 3 books by this time, but this was on a different level, writing about somebody with her abilities. Meanwhile, in the class, we did more than just learn about the philosophy. We got to practice things. Well, I didn't go there to learn anything. I'm a former Navy officer. I don't do that stuff. Ann would slap my hand for saying stuff. You don't talk about mediumship by saying stuff and weird and strange. Well, we had to pair up with a partner, and we had to hold a piece of their jewelry and see if we sensed anything. That's a practice called psychometry. And I held my partner's watch, and right away I said, do you have a headache? And she said, oh, I really do. And I said, oh, I just knew that. It kind of startled me. And I said, do you have a new car? And she said, well, yes, I do. I just got one. And I thought, how did I know that? And Ann Gaiman walks by and says, don't ask questions, state what you're hearing. Teacher. And I said, well, and all I'm hearing is the word sun, sun. I don't know what that is. And she said, I have the sun in spirit. This was my very first, what's that all about moment? Because this was never about me. But I'll explain later how that came about, how I was able to tune into those words. But meanwhile, we all had to report out afterwards what we had experienced in this exercise. The woman next to me reported that when she held her partner's watch, she saw her partner's dead aunt standing behind her, called her by name, described her, and had a message for her partner. I sat there and said, oh my gosh, this is what I need. I don't need somebody just because they're in a book and they're famous. I need somebody that I know is the real deal and doesn't know me. I had never given my last name in class, never put it on any roster, and this woman proved to me then and there she had mediumistic abilities. So I went up to her after class, I said, are you a medium? And she said, well, yes, I am. Will you meet with my husband and me? Sure, come on over. Wow. This is big. I get my husband to agree to go with me to see a medium. Can you imagine? But, you know, grief does things to people. It opens your mind because you want so badly to believe. And I was aware of that. So I was very aware of not being gullible. So this woman would only read for one person at a time. I sat down with her first while my husband was in another room. I was so nervous. I knew I would never get him back to another medium if she couldn't bring Suzan through. This is it, one shot. So I sat with her and she started doing the psychic thing, telling me about me, my relationship with my husband, my finances, my job. Everything's wonderful, she said. And I'm thinking, yeah, everything except this one hole in my heart right now. But I didn't tell her that. And there's a big difference between psychic work, where you tell somebody about themselves, and mediumistic work, where you connect them, and you let them know their loved ones are still around. Yeah. So finally I said, that's all great, but I was really hoping to hear from a certain spirit. I'm not giving anything away. And she said, no, there's nobody here. And I'm thinking, oh, no. And all of a sudden she said, do you have a headache? Because I suddenly have the headache of Zeus and Athena. Anybody that knows their mythology will know that Zeus was the god of lightning bolts. Lightning bolts, and Suzan was struck by lightning. And the medium said, and I'm suddenly having these tingly electric feelings all over me. And she felt a headache. She said, it's not my headache. And a medium will often sense how somebody passed by a physical sensation in their own body. So I'm suddenly on edge thinking, oh my goodness. And then the medium said, you know, there is somebody here. And it's a young woman. And she died rather suddenly. And she appears to be in her 20s. And this is when I lost it and started crying. Because anybody can call themselves a medium and say, I have your great-grandmother here and she loved you very much and she's so aware of your troubles. I've heard that. But this woman nailed it. Nobody else came through but the one person I wanted to hear from. But she really clinched it with her next sentence. She said, well, this woman is standing in front of you, this young woman, and she's dancing in front of you saying, mother, mother. But she's bringing with her a little baby boy who she wants to introduce to you. But he's standing back shyly like he doesn't know who you are. Those of you who already know that this life is not all there is won't be surprised by that, but I was stunned. And I said, don't let her go away. And she said, what do you mean? I said, we got to bring my husband in here. And we got Ty in, and she described Suzan sitting on his lap with her arms around his neck and head on his shoulder, exactly as she used to sit with him when it was time to leave. Even as a tough-as-nails Marine sergeant at age 27, when it was time to go, she'd sit like that. See you, Daddy. And she described that perfectly, described her brown uniform and other things. Well, this is when I knew the comfort that comes from that kind of a message. You can rationalize all you want, but I can't find any way of explaining how that woman knew that other than that Suzan's spirit as pure energy was in that room and she was tuning into it. The comfort that brought me was something that I then knew I had to share with other people. And as already the author of 3 books, I knew I was going to write a book about spiritualism and about mediumship. So I sent Ann Gaiman an email. Can you meet with me so I can discuss my ideas about a book? Look, she agreed. This to me was like sitting with a celebrity. We went to lunch and I started telling her about my concept for a book and she appeared to not be even listening to me. She's doing this. She's doing this. Well, I know Ann now. What I know now is she was checking me out. She was checking out with her guides or tuning into another dimension and she finally looked at me and I said, I knew she doesn't want me to write that book about spiritualism. She wants me to write her book, but she's not going to say it. And doggone it, she wouldn't say it. I finally had to say, well, I could write your book. And that's when she did, even more of this discerning. And by the end of that lunch, we had shaken hands and agreed that I would go to Lilydale, New York, the spiritualist community there, and interview her for a week. And that's exactly how it played out. So I'm sitting there at the kitchen table in Lilydale with the great Ann Gaiman and her husband, Wayne Knoll, a professor of literature at Georgetown University and a former Jesuit priest. And I'm looking at Ann saying, okay, Ann, every good book has to have a hook. What is going to make your story different than anybody else's? And she's very humble, and she says, well, I don't know. And I said, Wayne, come on, help me out here. What's different about Anne that will make people buy her book? And he said, oh, she's just so spiritual. And I said, yeah, I know, but... And all of a sudden, I'm looking back and forth, and I said, oh my gosh, Wayne, you're the hook. Can you imagine the pastor of a spiritualist church that talks to dead people married to a former Jesuit priest? It was just a great... I said, this book will have mass appeal. No pun intended. And so Wayne agreed to let me tell their story as well. And that book became The Priest and the Medium. Well, how that changed my life in ways that I never expected. I went back and I have to tell you a story about writing that book. I was sitting in my living room and decided to take a break and do some meditation. Right after Suzan passed, I started meditating. And I bring this up because I am absolutely convinced I wouldn't be standing here talking to you today as a medium myself without the fact that I had started meditating daily, knowing that that was going to be the key to help me sense the spirit world. So I took a break from writing, sitting in my living room and saying, Suzan, can you appear to me, please? Still thinking she's going to show up in my living room. Well, I didn't see anything, but suddenly my little dachshund, Rudy, goes shooting out of his bed, runs across the living room and stops in the hallway and looks up at nothing. And I thought, what is he looking at? And then he trotted over to the landing of our stairways, took one step up and stared up at Susan's picture on the wall. Now what I know about the spirit world is, if I'm in the spirit world and I'm going, Suzanne, I'm here, hello, and Suzanne's not reacting, but the dog is, what am I going to do? I'm going to go stand in front of my picture and go, hey, it's me, and the dog's looking up at it going, huh? And so then the dog trotted over and then sat and stared at the chair right beside me with his ears pinned to his head and this really confused look on his face. And boy, I enacted this scene for my husband, probably pretty comical, this is what the dog did. But I was convinced then that she's around, not only in that reading, but she's around. So I finished The Priest and the Medium, and I had just sent it off to my agent, and I get this phone call from a medium named Janet Nohavik, who I had met in Lilydale because she was Anne Gaiman's neighbor in Lilydale. Janet was a very interesting character because she used to be a Catholic nun and is now pastor of her own spiritualist church in northern New Jersey. And Janet said, I had an opening on my list of readings. You've been on my list for almost a year. I'd like to give you your reading. And I said, great. So the next week, I have a phone reading with her. I'm thinking, how's she going to bring through spirits on the phone? Well, she did just an amazing job. She brought through my father, who had just passed, and she brought through Suzan. And then, at the end of the phone call, she said, Suzanne, I have a favor to ask you. I'd like you to write my story. And wow, that was tempting, because there's a great hook there. A former nun becomes a medium, but that's a big undertaking to take on another book for another year. But I agreed to do it. Another life-changing decision. If you're going to research somebody's life, you got to do it right. And Janet, as you heard from Diane, is a teacher of mediumship. She gives a series of 3 classes over 3 weekends. And I said, Janet, if I'm going to write about your life, I need to attend your classes to describe how you teach, what you're like, what you believe in. She said, great. So I go up to Lilydale. I had interviewed her outside of Lilydale for a week. I did do that and then went to her class. We're walking to her class the first night, walking together. And I said, now Janet, I'm just going to sit in with the students, blend in with my little tape recorder going. Don't tell anybody why I'm there. I'll just pretend I'm one of the students. And she looks at me and she said, oh no, you're going to have an experience here this weekend. And I said, how do you know? And she gives me this look. And I said, oh yeah, you're a psychic. I forgot. And this is the second lesson I have for everybody. The importance of belief. Janet planted that seed of belief in my mind right then and there that I would have an experience with the spirit world. If she hadn't done that, I don't know if I would be here today talking about mediumship and this aspect of it. How many of us hold ourselves back from doing anything because we don't believe we can do it. And it takes somebody else to tell us, you can do that, you know. So we get into class, and Janet's talking about how a medium will step to the front of a group and tune into a spirit presence and give evidence that they're there with you in the room. And she says, and I need a volunteer from the class to come up and give a demonstration. Suzanne, thank you very much. I could have killed her. I'm not a medium. I was there to take notes, and she pulls me up to the front of the room, and I may be a public speaker, but this is a whole different thing, to stand and bring through a spirit. Is she crazy? So what do I do with my arms? What do I do? I close my eyes, and she said, well, there is somebody here. There's that belief again. Now, I knew Janet is one of the best of the best. She's awesome. If she says there's a spirit there and she doesn't lie, then there must be somebody, so maybe I can tune in. And she says, male or female? I said, male. And she said, you're right. And I thought, well, that was 50-50 chance, right? Pretty easy. And she said, but I don't know if I guessed, if I sensed it, I didn't know. She said, what else? How old was he when he passed? And for some reason, I saw the number 70 in my mind. I said, 70. She said, okay. How did he die? I'm thinking, how am I supposed to know? I closed my eyes. I said, he died of cancer, because it just went through my mind. But I'm not sensing any person, I'm just sensing these things. And she said, what do he look like? Full head of white hair. And Janet says, can anybody here take this? And this woman raises her hand and she says, my dad died at 70 from cancer, and he had a full head of hair. And Janet looks at me, she says, what do you do for a living? I said, well, I just heard the word engineer. And the girl says, my dad was an engineer. And I'm starting to, I'm not good at math, but I knew this was, you know, not like 50-50 to be getting all these things. And Janet says, well, what else are you getting? All I wanted to do was sit down, but I said, well, all of a sudden I see patent leather shoes, and I'm sensing somebody dancing, and I just heard the word twinkle toes. And this girl said, my father and mother danced ballroom dancing all the time, and she called him twinkle toes. And I just went, whoa. And Janet said, what else are you getting? And I said, may I please sit down now? So I did. I got off the hook then. But the rest of the weekend, the same thing happened. We would pair up with a classmate who we'd never met before, and you just have to tell them what you're perceiving. And again, this is because by this time, I had been meditating daily for, by then, probably 2 years since Susan passed. And I've trained my brain to be quiet. And it's hard to hear these things if your brain is constantly going like this. So I'm a big note taker. And every time somebody would say, yes, yes, that's my dad or my mother or my grandmother, I'd write it down, and I'd be calling my husband up and saying, listen what I sensed, listen what I heard. And this woman confirmed this. So I go back for Janet's second class, same thing happens again. Matching up with people, she makes you stand in front of people, and I'm getting, and it's not like 100%. But all you need is a few really wow moments, like twinkle toes, to let you know there's something going on here. The third class of hers, she had me in front of the class, and I said, well, I'm hearing Uncle Fred. Somebody had an Uncle Fred, and I see him driving down this road. I could see it in my mind's eye. And it's like, this is Utah. There's some butte in the distance. He's out in Utah, and he was a real loner. And I'm thinking, how do I know these things? And I said, and he's showing me a metal trash can. What's that all about? This woman raises her hand and she said, my Uncle Fred lived in Utah. He was a real loner, and his father was murdered and stuffed in a trash can.
Oh, wow.
So I was staying with Janet while there to do the research. I went back, and I remember rocking in rocking chairs on her front porch and saying, you know, Janet, I can't do this halfway. I can't be wondering how far can I take this. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, but all I do know is that I want to see how far this will go. And I know you were trained in England, and in England they're really into evidential mediumship. And what I mean by that is, twinkle toes, if that's your nickname, that's evidence. Metal trash can, that's evidence. Your great-grandmother loves you very much is a beautiful message, and it means so much more when it's backed up with evidence. I wanted to be trained that way. So I said, I want to go where you were trained. I want to go to Arthur Findlay College in Stansted, England. They offer intense 1-week courses. It's not like a semester, but it's like boot camp for mediums. 12 hours a day, 7 days of nothing but doing this, pushing yourself, learning techniques to make it better, meditating, learning the spiritual aspects of this, what this is all about. And she looked at me and she giggled and she was thrilled, but she said, "You better watch out, because it's going to change your life." And I said, "I'm ready for that." So I went to England with several very specific goals, but my number one, other than learning to trust what I was perceiving, was to know that I was tuning into more than just data in the sky. That I'm not just pulling twinkle toes out, some piece of telepathy that's left behind. I wanted to know these were actual spirit people that are still around. Oh boy, my prayers were answered there. I had this amazing teacher, and she really pushed us that week. And then she went out on a limb and said, "Let's try a little trance work. This is supposed to be just mediumship, but I want you to try to ask the spirit to blend with your energy and see what you feel." And I'm thinking, ooh, that's what I want. So I didn't go first. Several of my classmates went first, and they're sitting up there in the hot seat, and we were allowed to keep talking to put them at ease. And I remember the teacher saying, "Oh yes, do you see that the spirit blending with her?" And everybody that could see spirit with their eyes is saying, "Oh yeah, that's really good." And I'm sitting there saying, "Boy, wouldn't I love to see?" Then I could trust that. And they're saying, "Oh yes, it's an older woman now blending with this female student." And I'm thinking, that I'm such a skeptic. If I could see that, I could believe it. And I turned to the woman next to me and I said, "I don't see anything." And she said, "You ever try to see auras? You know how they train you to just relax your eyes and just go out of focus? Some of you have probably heard of that." She said, "Just relax your eyes. Don't look so hard with your real eyes." So I relaxed my eyes and I literally went like that. Because all of a sudden it looked like this young student had a pair of granny glasses on, little square glasses, wispy things. And I said, "I see glasses." And the teacher said, "Oh yes, she's wearing glasses. The old lady in spirit's wearing glasses." And I thought, is this why Janet and Havoc can tune into the same spirit that I'm tuning into? Because she sees them? And then all of a sudden, I can see like a wispy bun on the top of this girl's head. But she has long hair. It's a bun. And just as I'm thinking that, somebody down here says, "Oh, do you see the bun on the back of her head?" It was just like if you've ever gone to Disneyland or Disney World and you're riding the little car that goes past the mirrors and it looks like there's a ghost in the car with you. It was the same thing, but I was seeing it with my own eyes. This may be hard for some of you to understand. I can only tell you when you experience that with your own eyes, it's wow. So then it was my turn. I didn't know what to expect, but I sit in the seat. I didn't even know what to do to go into trance, or they call it a light altered state. So I just went into my meditation routine, and I'm going deeper and deeper, and I'm just repeating, "I surrender, I surrender, I love you." Because I know that love is the highest vibration. We have to raise our vibration, and the spirit world has to lower theirs, and you meet in the middle. So if I want my vibration high to tune in the spirit world, think loving thoughts. So I'm saying these things, and all of a sudden I can hear the teacher saying, "Oh, look, there are 2 of them." And then she's saying, "This is one of the best blendings I've ever seen." And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I don't feel anything. What's going on? But I just said, something must be working. So I keep saying, "I surrender, I surrender." And my hands are on my lap. And all of a sudden, my little right finger goes, boink, just up in the air like that. And I remember thinking, I didn't do that. And everybody stopped talking. And then all of a sudden, my arm fell off to the side. And I'm thinking, I didn't do that either. And then it just levitated. It went up like this and hovered. And for me to do this right now is taking effort from my shoulder muscles. But there was no effort. It was as if there was a pillow of air under my arm. And I knew I wasn't doing that. And I just lost it. I broke down sobbing and broke the link with whoever was there, because this was it. I had gone there to feel the presence of spirit, and only if you experience that can you know that that was real. I remember going back to my seat and sitting there playing with my finger and surreptitiously raising my arm and saying, boy, that's a totally different feeling. That class was followed by a meditation session, just a group meditation, and we were sitting there quietly, and I had, after the trance, brought through somebody's grandmother in spirit, just to pair up with somebody, and I had said, you have a grandmother on the other side, and she was frail and had a blanket over her lap, and she had lots of books, and she liked classical music, and the woman confirmed all of this. So I'm sitting in meditation, and all of a sudden, again, my hand is moving on its own like this, and I thought, what the heck is that? And all of a sudden I knew what I was doing. It was petting a cat. And I went up to my teacher afterwards and I said, am I losing my mind? Could I be petting a cat? And she said, absolutely, absolutely. And I confirmed with the woman her grandmother had a cat and would have been petting it. And I came out of that school convinced that the spirit world is real and that I was tuning into it. But I wasn't quite ready for that change in my life because I'm still very much the Navy officer, and I need to go back and start re-looking at how I label myself. You know, you give yourselves labels, and I wasn't ready to say I am a medium. But our final graduation exercise was to pair up with somebody we didn't know, 2 people in a row, and bring through evidence from their loved ones. And the last person I sat with, I sensed his brother in the spirit world. And I described him. I said, he used to hang out at the pubs a lot, didn't he? This was a British man I was with. And he said, yes, he did. I said, I can see his arm on the bar, and he had this great big laugh, a har, har, har kind of laugh. He said, that was my brother. And then he had these great big hands, big beefy hands, and he used tools in his work with those hands. And he said he was a machinist. And I said, and he was a big smoker. In fact, he died of lung cancer. And he said, it's exactly how he died. And I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, this is real. And this guy's confirming everything. And what we had learned that week is when you see a vision in your mind, hang on to it. Look further. Don't let it run away. Look further. What do you see? And I thought, well, this is our graduation exercise. Let's go for an A here. And I looked further at the pub, and all of a sudden I saw the sign outside the pub with letters on it. And I thought, no way. This can't be. And I said, did your brother hang out at a pub called the King's Arms? And he said, all the time. That was the place.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. That's what I said, wow. And that's what Janet Nohavik taught me to do. Go for wow. Go for wow. And why? Because that's evidence. But really what I learned there is it's not about amazing the people you sit with. Number one, it's about helping those on the other side to reconnect with you. You can pick a medium off the internet anytime and go to try to connect with your loved ones, but they can't guarantee you're going to do that. So they told us that it's like the spirit world rejoices and says, oh look, Suzanne is going to go sit with a medium. I can get through to her now. So we serve the spirit world. We can get their messages across. We can get their apologies across. Those things they never got to say. And so that's why we were taught that this is sacred work to be a medium. You're serving the spirit world and you're helping people to heal their own grief who are still here by showing them, hey, there is no way I could have known your brother, number one, that you have a brother on the other side, how he died, what he was like, what work he did, and the name of the pub where he hung out. That leaves no doubt in his mind. I'm tuning into his brother's spirit. His brother is not gone forever. So I came home from there and thought, oh boy, I need to practice this. I don't want to lose this skill. I want it to get better. So I started practicing with friends and neighbors. And the first neighbor came over and sat with me, and I sensed an uncle. And I remember telling her all kinds of things, and she said, yeah, that's right, that's right. And I said, I sensed that he walked with a limp. There was something wrong with his leg. And she said, well, I don't know about that. And I said, and I see boxing gloves. He liked to box. And she said, I don't know about that. Well, Janet Nohavik will teach you the spirit world never wastes a thought. If you hear it, you got to trust that. And I said, verify that. See if you can find out. The next day she comes running across the street. My Uncle Victor, I checked with my aunt. He had a limp and he used to box. So what that told me was, this is not telepathy. She didn't even know. Love when that happens. Love when that happens. So I want to share some more evidence with you. I don't want to forget anything, so I'll look at my notes here a few times. I had a woman come then. What happened was, I ran out of friends and neighbors. But they started telling their friends and neighbors, who would then start coming to me for readings. And it's still hard for me. I've given 135 readings, so I think I've graduated from baby medium to maybe teenager medium. I don't want to give the sense that I'm 100% accurate, that I'm a fantastic and gaming-like medium. I'm not, but I usually get several wows in every reading that lets people know, oh, she knew, she would describe my relative to a T. So I had this woman come in for a reading, and I remember bringing through her father and her mother, and having her father there, and the big wow moment was when I said, your father's telling me that he worked 9 to 5 like a banker. And she went, oh, he was a banker. And I said, oh, that's awesome. So a little like a month later, another woman comes. I've never met this woman before, and I hear the same thing. I have her father here, and he's saying, I worked banker's hours 9 to 5. And I thought, how many dead bankers are around here? And I told her that, and she said, yeah, my father was a banker. Come to find out, it was that other woman's sister. She didn't tell me she was sending her sister, and I'm so happy she didn't. Because to me, who is Miss Prove It, Prove It, Prove It, if I had known, then I would never have gone back and looked at notes from the reading, but I would have thought, did I remember that from the last reading? I had no idea these women were related and got the same evidence. What does that tell you? It tells you that woman's father really wanted to talk to his 2 daughters. So a month later, I get another woman, and I sensed a father and a mother, and I sensed the father wearing white shirts, but I said, this guy was really outdoorsy. And white shirts is my symbol for an office worker executive. But I said, this doesn't make sense because he's really into outdoors. He's out in the woods. And in fact, I said, you guys had a canoe when you were younger. He's showing me a canoe. She said, yeah, we used to go out in a canoe. And I said, ooh, there was a splash. Somebody fell in the water. And she said, I did when I was a kid. There's a memory. We always go for memories. What can you tell us that people will relate to? And I said, your mother was there, and this was no laughing matter when you fell in. And she said, yeah, she was pregnant and couldn't jump in and help me, and my sister had to save me. So we had quite a few wows in that reading. Come to find out, it was a 3rd sister. That woman set me up again. They didn't tell me. But I loved it because I was able to, I found out it was the guy with the white shirt was the banker. But he gave me new evidence, further evidence. So the first one, the initial sister, made this spreadsheet to compare all of the evidence. And it was really, really cool. I like that. That's kind of like the afterlife experiments, right? And we did all the same stuff. But I was very disappointed at the end of that to find out that sister number 3 had lost her husband in the last year, and I did not sense him. Very disappointed, because that's what it's all about, is letting her know he's still around. And I apologized, and I said, sometimes it's all like tuning in the radio. If the frequency is wrong and I can't get it, it's not that he didn't want to come through. This is one thing we stress. It's something in the energy. Either me or him or just a mismatch. Well, a couple weeks later, I gave a presentation in our community on science, how it explains how mediumship is possible, going into quantum physics and all this stuff that I never would have paid attention to in the past. But my effort to explain how is this possible, my skeptic's brain, and did a pretty good job of that. Had some scientists come up to me afterwards and say, I finally understand. That makes sense. That's a whole other topic. But at the end, I said my message that I say to everybody. Talk to your loved ones. They are around. When you call on them, they hear you. They hear you talking to them. Don't think they don't. Even if you don't sense them, talk to them. And this woman whose husband I didn't bring through came up and shook my hand afterwards, but she was crying because she says, I talk to Homer all the time, and I don't hear him. Well, about 3 nights later, I'm asleep. I wake up at 3 in the morning, and I sense Homer. I still don't know how I knew. Maybe I heard Homer, but he's there. And I remember thinking to him, okay, you're going to wake me up at 3 in the morning. You better give me something good. And my husband's asleep here. I don't want to bother him, but as a writer, I always keep paper and pen by the bed. There's thoughts that come in the middle of the night, so I roll over and grab the paper. And it was like doing a reading in the middle of the night. Homer is giving me this list. And I'm getting excited because I'm thinking, this is good. This is good. If I can verify this tomorrow, I know this is true because these are off-the-wall things. And he had a very clear message for his wife. So the next morning I call her. And I knew it was kind of bold to make this statement, but I said, your husband visited me in spirit in the middle of the night. And she, of course, gasped. And I said, he gave me a list of evidence, and I want to tell you what he told me. And he said, number one, he told me about a necklace that's very special. And there was something about fingering that necklace. Just reading my notes. And she said, oh my goodness, I gave him this gold crucifix when we were married, and he wore it every day. And I've worn it every day since he died, and I'm fingering it right now, because I finger it all the time. That's great, I said, he told me he was, I wrote down, member of a fraternal organization, like the Elks. And she said, oh, he was a member of the Odd Fellows. That's a fraternal organization. I said, he told me he was a hunter and a fisher. She said he was. I said, he showed me a hammer. She said, he was a builder. And I said, all right, I don't know what it is with the roses, but I wrote it in capital letters in the dark, and I wrote especially the scent of roses. And she said, roses were Homer's thing. He had them all over the garden, every variety, every color. He would bring me fresh bouquets all the time. And one day, shortly after he died, she said she was driving down the road. The car was full of her cigarette smoke, and all of a sudden, the car was filled with the scent of roses. And I said, well, now that you should be pretty sure that Homer was there last night, I need to give you his message. And it's underlined in my notes, and it says, I hear her. You have to let her know. I hear her. And then I said, and there was one other thing he said. Etched in stone. I don't know what that means. Is there something on his gravestone? And she's crying now. And she said, no, he wasn't just a builder. He was a master stonemason. So that was one of my favorite moments when Homer woke me up. And I called my teacher, Janet, and I shared that with her. I was so excited. And she said, Suzanne, you can't be letting those spirits wake you up in the middle of the night. You've got to have boundaries. I said, Janet, this has never happened before, and it was so good, and the comfort that brought to that man's wife. They can wake me up anytime they want, and I'm sad to say that they haven't woken me up since. I would welcome that, and it's why I tell people to honor those dreams when you dream of your loved ones, because it's when your brain gets in those slower brain states and it's quiet and it's not all the monkey chatter running around in there that you're more able to tune into the spirit world, that they are able to get through to you. Honor the dreams, and especially those dreams that don't disappear like misty little dreams in the morning. The ones that stick with you, those are visits. Those are visits. And speaking of visits, then, I've been meditating now for 3 years. What was my original goal? It was to know that Susan was still around. My first year giving readings, I did it for donations. I set up a foundation in Susan's memory so that all the money that I took in would go to charities that she would support. I finally had enough money to make a donation. The first one from the Suzan Giesemann Foundation, and we sent it to a charity she would have liked. The next morning in meditation, I'm sitting there and I was about to open my eyes when all of a sudden I sensed her. Clear as day. When I give a reading and I hear these thoughts and phrases and words, it all sounds like my own thoughts. But that morning, it was her voice. Hey, Suzanne. Just like she used to say, hey, Suzanne. And I was shocked, and she said, thanks for the check. And I thought, this is great. I'm going to go to your dad, and I'm going to say, Susan came in this morning, and he's going to say, that's nice, honey. And so, being trained in evidential mediumship, I said, Susan, you got to give me some evidence that you were here that I can share with your dad so he knows you were here. So tell me something about your mother, your biological mother, that I have no way of knowing. And she literally said, write this down. I had paper and pen nearby. I'll tell you why in a few minutes. I picked it up and I heard 3 things and they were kind of bizarre, and I got excited because I thought, good job. If this is right, if we can verify this, everybody will know you were here. I know you're here. So it's early. I meditate early. I wait till 9 o'clock and I call my husband's ex-wife. She's really on board with this mediumship work because I had given her transcripts from readings when Susan came through, like the lightning bolt thing. So she found great comfort in that. I said, Angie, Susan just visited me. She told me 3 things going on with you in your life right now. I need to verify them. She said, what's the first thing? I said, she told me your cat is sick. I mean, I've had cats before, a long time ago. I didn't even know if Angie had a cat, but I know they're pretty healthy generally. And she said, oh my goodness, Mireya has a urinary tract infection and we just brought her home from the vets and she's on medication. And I went, yes! You know, that's a good one. That's a good one. She said, what was number 2? I said, well, it was just one word. She just kept saying ladder. Something happened with you recently with a ladder. And she said, oh, I was just at my friend's wedding 2 days ago over the weekend, and everybody was running around like crazy trying to find the ladder. We needed it for the ceremony. Nobody could find the ladder, and it just appeared out of nowhere. And I said, okay, maybe that's a stretch, but I'll take that one. But the third one, she showed me those little white Christmas lights in a plastic tube. This was in October, so it's not Christmas time. They're in your house somewhere, and they're there now, and they're up year-round. This is what she showed me. And Angie said, they run right up the staircase. And I thought, oh, there we go. Home run. 3 hits. And so finally got to hear from Susan. And that was pretty awesome. But the reason I had the paper and pencil beside me is because Janet Nohavik had said to me, you should try automatic writing. That's where the spirit world will talk to you and you write down what you hear. And she said she had had good experience with that. So I had the paper and pen nearby, and in meditation I had heard some beautiful phrases, and I'd write them down. And Miss Commander here, every time, would say, oh, I'm making that up. I'm making that up. You can't prove that. There's no evidence in that. It's beautiful, but you can't prove it. So I put it aside. Well, I went to speak at a metaphysical bookstore about 1.5 years ago. And afterwards, the owner of the store, who was very intuitive, came up to me and said, Suzanne, my guides were talking to me during your talk. And I'm thinking, ooh, spirit guides. I don't know about spirit guides. I can't prove spirit guides. What did your spirit guides say to you? And she said, they said you're going to have an amazing experience in your meditation this week. And it's going to be wonderful. And they're going to give you advice about your next presentation. I said, okay, well, I look forward to that. Didn't know what that was all about. The next morning, I sit down to meditate. We're still sailing half the year now. So I was on my boat at the time. I'm in the aft cabin. I go to meditate. My husband's in the forward cabin. I went through the whole quiet period, and I'm about ready to stop, and my finger did that, just like it did in England. Twitched up just like that. I don't know what that's about. And then I just knew I was supposed to pick up the paper and pencil that I had kept nearby ever since Janet said to do that. And I heard a phrase and I wrote it down. And I heard another phrase and I wrote it down. And again, and all of a sudden I said, oh my gosh, they've sent me a poet. Because the phrases were rhyming. And I started to cry. Because I may have written 4 books by this time, 5 with Janet's. But I'm no poet. I've always hated poetry because I feel that with my black and white brain, there's only one way to interpret something. Poetry, if I can't interpret, then I've failed. So I never wrote poetry, never liked poetry, and Janet Nohavik was always saying the spirit world is so intelligent. And boy, how brilliant could they be to send me words that rhymed to let me know I was not making this up. So I just relaxed, I said I surrender, and I just kept writing with my eyes closed, non-stop. I would feel the bottom of the page, turn the page. I filled 3 pages. I couldn't remember, I didn't know what was on the page just because as soon as I would hear a phrase, I'd write it and the next one would come. But when I finished, I sat there crying again because I knew something had happened. I hadn't written that. And I came out of the aft cabin and my husband said, what's the matter? I heard you crying. And I said, I think I wrote a poem. And he said, what do you mean you think you wrote a poem? And I said, I held up the notebook and I said, I heard rhyming phrases, but I don't know what it says. Can I read it to you? And he said, yeah, read it. So this is the poem. Yes, prepare, but speak with confidence if you dare. Ours is to leave you without care. Such a gift is very rare. From love we come, it's in your genes. You have the talent, we the means. Rest in peace, assured of light. With us beside you, you'll soar in flight. The world is ready for these your words. They wait and listen with wings like birds. For ours is yours and yours is ours. Such is the greatness of the Great Spirit's powers. Blessed are all who know these truths. Shout it, blast it from the roofs. Be our voice, we work with you. We come to speak of beauty true. Divine is the light of which we speak. Beauty lies in the watch we keep. Speak of love, speak of beauty. This, my dear, is your great duty. We love you and hold you in our keep. Go forth and trust that you can speak. With this we leave you this blessed day. Come back to us and together we'll pray. For we are here, at your side we wait. It's with great hope we anticipate the truths you'll carry to those who listen. The truths of God on your words will glisten. Go now and rest, for there's work to do. We have great love and trust in you. You have our blessing, in you we're proud. Take our wisdom and shout it loud. We love you all, for this we've come. There is no rest till the Spirit's work is done. That was poem number 1. My husband, the destroyer captain, was crying at the end. He looked at me and he said, "You couldn't have done that." And I said, "I know." And that's why I was crying. And he said, "You were only back there a few minutes." I said, "I know." And that was poem number 1. And it happened again the next day. And it happened again the next day. And 1 year later, I had poem number 365,
Wow.
366, and every day in a meditative state, nonstop, in about 5 minutes, and always, always the topic of love, or the afterlife, or that spirit is eternal, all of these truths, these universal truths that doesn't matter what religion you are. And just talk about transforming someone's life. When that comes through your own consciousness day after day, you can't go back to anything you were before. So 365 poems later, still getting some poems. I'll share a couple more with you before we leave. But so that made me kind of question, well, do we have spirit guides or not? And I knew that somebody's feeding me this poetry, and they actually told me they were the Council of Poets. Okay, Council of Poets. And there were different voices, and the meter would change, the rhyming pattern would change, but one had a sense of humor. And but there were 2 guides in particular that I asked them what to call them. I always had a problem with spirit guides to begin with, and people that give kind of far out there names to their guides, that really made me, the skeptic in me, come up. So I heard just, they said, Boris was one and Sally's the other, and they said, names are not important. It's, you need a name, so we'll give you a name, but these are not our real names. So my friends and I jokingly talk about Boris and Sally, but they're very real to me now, because this Boris, I am convinced, is the one that blended with me in England. He's what we call a control, one that's there with you all the time when you give readings, because he's like the medium's medium. When the spirit world comes to me, if somebody can't regularly match my energy, he helps them communicate with me. As strange as that sound, I remember sitting across from a woman, and all of a sudden, Boris is whispering in my ear, she has a pain right here, and she needs to look into it, because she's ignoring doctor's advice. She thinks she can fix it on her own, but it's not going to go away. This was a whole new level of attunement for me, and I didn't want to be dispensing medical advice, but now Boris is saying, tell her. So I repeated what I just said to you, and she said, it's right here. This was my first real experience that the guide was real, because he's telling me concrete evidence, and I told her what she said. She said, I don't trust doctors at all. I fell on a saddle horn some time back, and got a big hematoma here, and this doctor botched it up, but I can fix it myself. And I said, no, you're supposed to go see a doctor about that. That was the first time with Boris. The other one was just 2 weeks ago. I sat with a woman, and I said, now, a lot of people come and they expect psychic readings. I'm not here to tell you about you. I'm here to let you know your loved ones are still around. You're okay with that? And she said, well, yeah, but I really wanted to hear about my health. And I thought, oh, I don't do health. But all of a sudden, I looked at her and I said, you don't have a lot of energy lately, do you? And she said, no. And I said, and you're not eating right. I've never met this woman before. And she said, oh, I've lost 5 pounds. And suddenly I'm seeing black spots here. And I thought, oh, I can't say that. I don't have enough trust in my own abilities yet, and she's going to run off and get a chest x-ray at my expense and get all worried. And here's Boris in my ear saying, tell her. And I said, I have to tell you, I see little black spots here. And this woman looked at me and said, oh yes, it's metastasized. And I said, so you know you have cancer? Because I knew it. And she said, yes, I know. And I said, so what is it you want to know about your health? And she only wanted to know if she could get a second opinion. So I tuned in and asked Boris, and he said, it is most advisable. And I said, not because you're going to get a different diagnosis, you're going to learn something new about your treatment that will be helpful. And I just share this with you because it's my mind, how my mind always goes through this can't be real thing. And the poor spirits on the other side have to deal with me all the time, so they give me these good things. I was in a nail salon not too long ago, sitting next to a woman getting her nails done, and we were talking about RVing around the country, and she said, well, I did used to RV until my husband passed 8 years ago, and all of a sudden I went, oh, I don't know why I'm sitting next to this woman. And all of a sudden I hear like somebody shouting in my head, Jack, Jack. And I thought, oh, I just can't do this out of the blue like this. And Boris says, tell her. And I looked at her and I said, your husband's name was Jack, wasn't it? And she went like this, she went, did I say that? And the 2 nail technicians are sitting across from me, and they're going, you didn't say that. And my nail tech says, are you psychic? And I said, well, I'm a medium. And I said, and your husband was an engineer? And she said, yeah. And I said, and he had heart problems? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, you may just want to look at my website and read a little about that. She says, well, I don't know about all that. And I said, you don't have to believe. I just want to tell you that your husband's around and he's waiting for you. And she went away and I thought, ooh, I don't know that you're supposed to do that. But then I went to leave, and you know, ladies, you go and you sit in the front and dry your nails for a while. I ended up sitting right across from her, and she was just getting up to go, and she said, I have to tell you, this was the best visit I ever had to a nail salon. So we get through however we have to. So here's a poem for you. This was poem number 224. Stroke the kitten's paws, how soft they feel, velvet to the touch. Is nothing real? You look, you see, you taste and hear. Is all illusion that which you hold dear? If real to you these things they seem, consider how they feel in a dream. There you move with silent ease, with all as easy as you please. Reality's a shifting thing, such a challenge it does bring. To know what's real and what's illusion can cause great questions and confusion. The answer lies not in the brain, where misperception does remain, but in the mind, which does survive. That's the place in which you thrive. Each realm in which you find yourself brings to you true growth and wealth. It matters not what's real or fake, only what learning you do take. If indeed your life's a dream, then learn from it. What does it mean? Use this time to stretch and grow. There is no limit to how far you go. All life is yours to grow and thrive. Rejoice that you are here, alive. And when from this dream you do awake, then all your learning you will take to dream again and learn some more when you pass through heaven's door. Don't applaud me, tell the council of poets. Okay. Just a little bit more evidence for you. Remember how I felt my arm move, and I think, okay, is that real? Is that real? And I thought I was petting a cat. Well, I was preparing for a reading, and every time before somebody comes, I meditate, and I literally say to the loved ones of Jane Doe who's coming later, please start blending with my energy so that they can hear from you today. And I'm sitting there with my hands on my lap, and my fingers start doing this, all on their own. I knew I wasn't doing it. I thought, what is that? They're drumming like hoofbeats. Vroom, vroom. I I got out of the meditation, I went to my husband who was shaving, and I said, mark my words, the woman that's coming today has somebody on the other side that had something to do with horses. I just want to go on the record for that. And he says, okay, I got it. So the woman comes for the reading, and I brought through a father, and I heard the word gambler. I said, your father, I sense him, he was a gambler. And she said, yes, he was. And I said, well, I don't want to say this, but he's talking about being a cheater, too. And she said, oh, yes, he was. And then you feel this pressure, and it's an apology. You can actually feel it. I do anyway. I said, he really wants to apologize for not having his priorities straight when he was here. And she started crying, and the pressure backed off here, and I knew that then that's how you help two souls to heal. But then I said, your father showed me, just like my friend's uncle, a pain in his left leg. He injured it somehow, and he never got over that injury. And she said, yeah, Easter Sunday, I was 9 years old. We were horseback riding, and he fell off and never recovered from that. And I went, the horses. That's it. I knew your father was going to come through, so that was the horses. Another time I remember getting all tingly, this tingly feeling in my legs, and I had brought through a woman's son that she lost, and she said he had been in a car accident and was paralyzed in the legs. And then one day I was sitting in my chair very relaxed, bringing through the evidence, and all of a sudden something made me sit up in my chair, shoulders back, ramrod straight, and I said, whoa, the presence. I mean, you feel it. That's when I know I'm not pulling data out of there. I said, this man, this is your husband. I said, why am I sitting like this? She said, he was a general in the army. I said, that works for me. And I said, he's showing me a bayonet. He killed people with that bayonet. She said, yeah, he killed the Nazis in World War II. He killed one or two with his bayonet. To get that kind of evidence, that's wow stuff for me. That's wow stuff. Then I had a woman, I sensed her husband that she had lost within the last couple of years. Those are some of my favorites. You know, these women come and they're hurting so badly, and you can paint those people back to life, tell them exactly what their personality was like, things they like to do, things they remember. And I remember sitting with her, and I said, I can feel they feel the affection that the spirits want to give to them. Sometimes it's just a reaching out to caress. Sometimes they're squeezing their hand. But I said, your husband wants to embrace you like this. I said, that's strange, because I sense embraces a lot, but he's going like this. And she started crying. I said, what's the matter? She said, every morning I meditate, and I say, John, this is for you. Mom, this is for you. And Dad, this is for you. Wow, that was cool. So she looks at me and she says, so can you tell me what he did for work? And I said, oh, don't ask me questions like that, because then my brain starts guessing, and that's a totally different mindset than remaining passive and receptive and letting the spirit world give you the evidence. So I want to start guessing, and I heard a couple things, and she's sitting there saying, it's easy, it's easy. And I'm thinking, easy, like 1,000 professions this guy could have been. And I'm trying not to guess, but I'm hearing art, and then I'm thinking architect, and I'm going art in my mind, art, architect, and I heard Boris say, you're circling all around it, just say it. And I said, art, and she said, that's it, he was an artist. And I said, that was easy? And she shows me she's wearing a shirt with Picasso paintings on it. She said, I wore this in his memory. And I said, well, luckily I never would have guessed from that shirt. But again, this is how my control Boris is there saying, you're circling around, architect. So I'm glad I listened to him. And lately, they've been getting very creative with me, the spirit world. They use a lot of symbolism. They're making it a little hard on me, but I understand why. I was given a reading for a woman, and I brought through a gentleman. I didn't know the relationship, but I knew it was not a blood relative. I said, there's a gentleman here, I sense him. He died right around age 55, and he had a heart attack. And he was wearing a ball cap. I feel that he wore it all the time, and he was really into sports. And she's saying, no, I don't know anybody like that. I can't identify that. I'm thinking, I know what I'm sensing. And all of a sudden I heard, clear as day, Cleopatra. I knew this guy's not named Cleopatra, but I couldn't figure that out. I said to her, I just heard Cleopatra. She said, what's that? And I said, well, knowing how the spirit world works, this guy's name was Anthony. And she went, oh, I knew an Anthony that died at 55 of a heart attack, a friend. So I had to go confirm this with Janet. I said, Janet, this is how I picture this. The spirit world's over there saying, Anthony, Anthony. And I'm just sitting there, obviously not hearing it. So they say, well, we know how her brain works. Let's give her Cleopatra. And I go, oh, Cleopatra. And this is how they get through. That is kind of intelligent, isn't it? So the other day I heard the word sneezing, just sneezing. And then I heard handkerchief. Sneezing handkerchief. I said, I think your husband always carried a handkerchief right here. She said, always, always. Just a fancy one. But, so why don't they just say it? They give me sneezing. A couple others. Oh, this one was crazy. I sensed the woman's mother, and I heard the word Thursday, tornado. What's that all about? Did you or your mother witness a tornado? She said, no. And I said, well, then the only thing I can think is your mother was from Kansas. And she said, she was. Very strange, very strange. Whatever it takes, right? Okay. And then my final wonderful moment to help me know that this spirit world is real, I came and I spoke at the Body, Mind, Spirit Expo. And afterwards, I think it was the one where I spoke here, 2 women came up to me and they said, you can't believe the energy while you were speaking, the energy in the room. I think, they said, it was an archangel standing behind you. And I'm inside, I keep my face straight, but inside I'm saying, oh, I don't know about archangels. I'm just now believing in spirit guides. I'm not ready for archangels yet. And I said, thank you very much. And as the women turned to leave, my heart flooded with this emotion. And without even thinking, and not even understanding why, I said aloud, I love you. No, I thought it. This is the key. I thought, I love you, to these 2 women as they walked away. And one of them turned around and said aloud to me, I love you too. I was stunned. I grabbed her by the shoulder. I said, why did you just say that just now? I only thought that to you. And she just gave me this enigmatic smile and walked away. This made me think a little bit more about angels. So I went to the nearest Barnes & Noble and bought a book on archangels and started reading it. I'm thinking, not sure about this. And so the next day I had a reading. A woman came to me for a reading. And I sensed 2 female friends on the spirit world, and I started to describe them to her. I said, they were older than you, and I see the 3 of you sitting around holding hands. I don't know what that's all about. She said, we used to pray together. I said, oh, that makes sense. I said, one woman is saying that she was ahead of her time. She said, oh, yes, she was. I said, the other one used to do things with cards. These are tarot cards. She said, yes, they're tarot cards. She used to use them all the time. And then the woman in spirit looked at me and said, tell her it's all true. It's all true. Mm-hmm. And I said, your friend wants you to know it's all true. Does that mean something to you? And she said, oh, yes. We used to discuss the afterlife and the spirit world and all of these things. I said, well, she wants you to know that. And then this spirit woman, it was as if she crooked her finger at me, and I heard her say very clearly, angels are real. And I laughed. I laughed, and I looked at this woman across from me, and I said, and your friend wants me to know angels are real. And she started crying. And I said, why are you crying? And she said, because when I came in here today, I talked to my 2 female friends, and I said, please be here for me today. And if you are, please tell me something about angels, and then I'll know you're really here. That was wonderful. So, I'll leave you in a minute with a poem, but the thing is, I say I go for wow, and I give you all these wow stories, but like I said before, it's not about entertainment, it's not about amazing people, it's about helping people by overwhelming them with evidence to know this life is not all there is. I know when I pass to the other side, it's just going to be like stepping through a veil, and Susan's going to be right there to say, here I am, been waiting for you. And it just takes the fear out of death, doesn't it? And it's very comforting to know that when you think you've lost somebody, you haven't lost them forever. And I'll say it again, and I'll say it 1,000 times. Talk to them, because they hear you. So here, I'll leave you with a final poem from the Spirit World. Gone from your sight, but not from your heart. Those who have left you are not really apart. Death is just the transition to a new type of form, but close in your thoughts, your heart we still warm. Death is merely a change from the body to spirit. If you listen quite closely for our voice, you will hear it. We're with you in thought, any time you do call. At your side in an instant, no bother at all. For our world is yours, it's the very same place. It's a world of pure thought, with no time and no space. It's a world full of colors, far greater than dreams, where all that surrounds us is as real as it seems. So cry not for us when you say we have died. It's just a new world where our soul does reside. And here we do wait till we welcome the day when all we have loved at our side again play. There's nothing to fear, for death comes to you all. Great peace does await you when to you comes the call. For now live with gusto and know that we wait, for to be reunited is everyone's fate.
We could do 5-10 minutes.
5 to 10 minutes of questions, she says. Yes.
Have you ever had a reading from the spiritual heart? From beings like archangels and
Have I ever had a reading when I get archangels and such?
archangels and the spiritual hierarchy, Jesus, Mary, Buddha? You know?
Yes, I have sensed the presence of Jesus, and I do channeling now, which I didn't even want to go out on that limb. Boris and Sally talk every week to our friends and answer all kinds of questions, and we just look at the sanity test. How does this feel? How does it sound? And people keep coming back because so far we can't really reject what they say.
And so can you give us any indication of what the spiritual hierarchy or the archangels' messages were?
No, not tonight. They're just, but it's all, the bottom line is love. It's all about love. It comes back around to that what you do now really matters. It comes back to that all the time. It's all about how you live your life now in preparation for the next level. It's all about your soul's evolution. Okay? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about mediumship and work. How do you keep your physical body healthy working with other energies?
How do I keep my physical body healthy working with other energies? I've always been an exerciser from the Navy days, and that's a good point, because I do make a point when I know when I'm running or bicycling, I know that that is a lot of energy you're working with, and it could be a drain, and it can be tiring, so just...
Have you ever had physical experiences where you feel drained after readings?
Yes, have I had physical experiences where I feel drained? In one of the channeling sessions, I tell people in the room, send energy to me that increases my vibration. That will help me connect better. And I didn't realize that I had a room full of Reiki healers. and I literally, I leaned over to the side and fell off the chair. And I couldn't get up. The energy, my whole body was shaking. And that's when they put me on the couch, and I said, I don't know how to stop this. And they were just kind of sweeping the energy out of me, and they said, well, we're all healers, we'll do this. And I said, you're all healers? Well, no wonder. So, yeah, energy is real. That's what we all are, is energy. Energy. Yes?
I'm wondering why, when I've been to these, where spiritualists speak, and who, the loved ones that come through, don't seem to give advice. It's always just, we love you, we're here, but they don't really say,
Why don't loved ones give us advice? I have my own theory on that, and hopefully it's inspired. And that's because, like I said in the beginning, we're all here to learn our own lessons. And if they tell you what to do, they are going to take away from the lesson that you came here to learn. Okay?
So
Yes.
they don't usually give advice.
I usually get messages of things they want them to know, but I haven't gotten advice.
And they were both in the same car together, and they had switched places in the car. It was very profound.
Okay, so he's talking about an experience where he sensed a woman's sister in a car accident and they had switched places.
But the question is, because I think what came through from that reading for me was that this sister was reaching out to this woman that I was doing the reading for, saying that to feel joyous. She wanted this woman to be happy.
He's saying that the spirit wanted the one left behind to feel joyous and happy, and yes,
Right.
it would.
So that she would open up her life and not feel guilty. This woman had felt guilty that she switched places in the car with her sister, at her sister's request, by the way.
Okay, what's the question?
The question is, you said that sometimes the spirits don't get advice, but it was like this spirit was really saying. to this
I
woman-
said that I haven't had spirits
Oh,
give
okay.
advice. I'm
Oh.
certainly not saying it doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
yeah. So I just wondered if anything like that has come through, because I mean, it comes through for me a lot when I come to meetings.
No, if you're attuned to the spirit world and you're getting advice for people, if they need to hear it and they take it on board, go with it. Okay, one more? One more question? Okay, back here.
Do you get messages, the messages you've been given are of a personal nature, but more for the world at large? Or
In the channeling, the messages are for the world at large. Ah, okay. Every morning they speak to me and I get a message. So go to my website, my cards are out there, SuzanGiesemann.com, and click on the daily blog. Sanaya says, there's a beautiful message every day. And all 370 poems are also on the website.
.com or .org?
Messagesofhopepoems.org is the poetry. My website, since my name is hard to spell, you can also get there by going to theotherreality.com. And then the daily inspiration that I hear and right in the eyes closed is, the guide told us to call her Sanaya, S-A-N-A-Y-A, sanayasays.com. A commercial announcement. And I'll be coming back to Chicago in the next few months to give a full-day workshop on attuning to your own spirit and learning to live a purpose-filled life. And if you're interested in knowing when I'm coming, because you might want to come, there's an email sign-up sheet on the table in the lobby.
Thank you, Suzanne. So blessed we are. So blessed we are. Don't forget, next month we have Barbara Harris Whitfield. She was one of the early pioneers in near-death studies and research in the early 80s. And she has 6 books, and she's a very, very interesting lady. I know you'll want to partake in that as well. So hope to see you then. We're going to Ruby's. Thank you all. Take good care. Go with God.